Back in 2016, the state did pass a law that returned children back to their communities. It limited the number of children in group homes. Children that were doing the low-level offenses like truancy or consuming alcohol, they were kept in the community. They weren't removed. They weren't detained. As those other children have been returned to the communities or kept in the communities, it's challenging because now we have children who may be having some behavioral issues, maybe some challenges at home. So our communities may be not yet equipped to consider, okay, the child is back in the community or is staying in the community. Now, what are the services? What are the supports that we could provide?
Our Town, Our Kids is a pilot project funded through the Kansas Department of Corrections, Kansas Advisory Group, and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. The 2-year project focuses on collaboration with local communities using a process called study circles, a procedure of developing and training local stakeholders in both process and content to investigate, analyze, and develop healthy youth initiatives. Kansas State University, K-State Research and Extension, and Fort Hays State University are working together on this project to empower local communities to develop healthy youth initiatives, which will reduce the number of youths at risk for involvement in the juvenile justice system. On today's Sound Living, Juvenile Justice Study Circles. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. 23 counties from 4 judicial districts are involved in this pilot project. Finney, Greeley, Hamilton, Kearney, Scott, and Wichita in the 25th District, and Cheyenne, Logan, Sheridan, Sherman, Rollins, Thomas, Wallace, Decatur, Graham, Norton, Osborne, Phillips, Smith, Ellis, Gove, Rooks, and Trego from the combined 15th, 17th, and 23rd judicial districts. Kansas State University Associate Professor and Extension Specialist in the School of Family Studies and Human Services, Elaine Johannes, serves on the Kansas Advisory Group and the Our Town, Our Kids pilot project. Wyandotte County Extension Agent and State Specialist for Community Vitality Programs, Bruce Chladny, is also involved in the project. Johannes says the Kansas Advisory Group, a governor-appointed group, has 2 primary goals. The first being to improve the overall juvenile justice system.
If a child happens to be committing low-level offenses or higher ones, they may find themselves in this drain of the justice system, from arrest to adjudication to correction and then onward. So we're trying to improve that. The second thing, though, is to keep kids out of that. Are there things that maybe the advisory council, the advisory group, the Justice Council, all of those groups can do to improve the health and well-being of younger folks across the state so they don't get caught in this justice environment? And I think, Bruce, you'd probably add a third to that, probably community empowerment.
Well, that's right, Elaine. Yeah, it's, another aspect is just helping communities recognize the issues themselves and look at the data and understand data and figure out where the holes are and what needs to be looked at and what needs to be fixed and what's functioning and what's not functioning so that they can improve the system and move forward.
And that's part of the Our Town, Our Kids project that you're working on really in several judicial districts right now?
Yes, that's correct. In the districts out in the northwest part of the state, we've got the funding and the resources in place to address some of those issues, to help work with communities and convene what we're calling study circles, to help communities come together and have conversations about the current conditions and then educate themselves about what needs to be done and what can be done, and then ultimately put together maybe an action plan that they can use to move forward to help address those issues into the future and beyond. And the way a study circle works is they're led by a trained facilitator. So we've contracted with 7 facilitators that are going to be convening 6 sets of study circles out in the target area. And they will be working with interested citizen volunteers that have a vested interest in this project and in this initiative. And so they could be anywhere from somebody that's involved in the juvenile justice system. It could be somebody involved in the school system. It could be church leaders, community leaders. Anybody that has an interest in this issue will come together for a series of workshops or work sessions, if you will, 4 of them to be specific. And we will work with them through the facilitator to step through a process whereby they understand the current situation, start brainstorming ideas and ways to address the situation, and then ultimately how do we move forward as a community.
How widespread of a problem is this? Do we know how widespread of a problem this is?
Well, it's an interesting issue. Back in 2016, the state did pass a law, it was a Senate bill, that returned children that had been in detention back to their communities. Kansas was detaining youth at a rate that was higher than some other states. By the way, we aren't the only state going through this. There are 6 to 8 states that are going through this reform. I think we are the leader in it. So in 2016, the law was passed. It returned children back to their communities. It limited the number of children in group homes, children that were doing the low-level offenses like truancy or consuming alcohol. They were kept in the community. They weren't removed. They weren't detained. So we have a success there, 63% reduction in the number of children in the detention homes and facilities. Those still exist, though, for the children that do need to have the structure. But as those other children have been returned to the communities or kept in the communities, it's challenging because now we have children who may be having some behavioral issues, truancy issues, maybe some challenges at home. They are providing challenges in schools. So our communities may be not yet equipped to consider, okay, the child is back in the community or is staying in the community. Now, what are the services? What are the supports that we could provide? Bruce and I work in primarily rural areas, and I think that's especially a challenge because if we don't have the agencies, the systems out there, then it's really hard to provide the care and support that a child and their household need.
So the circles then will be looking for some of the alternative ways to handle this situation?
I think that's the right way of looking at it because individually, folks only know what they know. However, collectively, when you start meeting as a group and start realizing there are some alternatives that we haven't considered. And all of a sudden you start that brainstorming process and you start that synergy, that one thing, a small thought leads to another, thought leads to another, and pretty soon you've got a very viable option potentially that maybe one individual had never thought about on their own. And so I think that's the power of doing these study circles is that it's really bringing the community together and one, create an awareness, and especially if we start looking at the numbers, because I think a lot of times folks don't realize what the numbers are actually saying. They only know what they see and what they experience in their own daily lives. And so that's the power and the beauty of forming these study circles is that you're helping these groups work collaboratively together in a democratic process.
And I may add, Bruce, the way you've described it, I think, is just wonderful because it describes how citizens, once they're convened, they can share ideas, they can share awareness, and they can share ideas about how young folks grow. Sometimes parents don't know that the behaviors that a young person experiments with is just part of trying to grow up. So I think the circles will allow that opportunity for parents to share, for people to talk about what's going on with our kids here in the community. Do we have enough after-school programs? Do we have enough 4-H clubs? Do we have enough activities to keep people involved? And that's a great thing. And maybe that doesn't require additional agencies and funds. But on the other hand, if the data and if the discussion results in an awareness that, we really do have some concerns here. Statistically, we do have children who are risking too much. And maybe we have some issues with mental health, behavioral health, other kinds of things. I think the circle environment allows that to be addressed too. And one of the objectives of our work is to create a toolkit that we're learning from the study circle experience. We're developing some helpmates with data that are really designed with our friends at Fort Hays State. But those toolkits that are going to be the result of our work will be used statewide.
Yeah, there'll be resources for other communities to pull from and hopefully replicate in their own setting. And hopefully we'll have enough information and kind of how-to videos and pamphlets and worksheets and things like that allow other communities to say, okay, we have similar issues, we have similar problems. Here's how we address them by forming study circles, by looking at the data, by doing all these things that we're kind of initiating in our target group right now.
The goal here is to not only identify problem areas, but then to find the solutions so that we don't keep going through the same thing year after year after year with other teens as they become teens?
Yes. Ideally, the circles will result in sustainable change, sustainable supports. The community will decide what it needs and find a way to bring it forth. I'm a little hesitant because, Bruce, and you might remember back in 1996, Kansas went through a juvenile justice reform then, and Extension was involved then too. We actually convened community forums. Several of our faculty out in the field were trained to conduct the forums, and plans were the result. And those plans were to create programs and supports for young folks in the communities. And they went great guns until budget changes, leadership changes, and then there was this national thought that, young people would do well if they were locked up. And that, of course, infused itself in our state, and we went that way for quite some time. And young people ended up locked up and locked in, and unfortunately, the results were not very good. When we look at the data from that kind of experience, young people did not come out and not offend. So we need to learn again how we need to look at young folks, their families, their communities, and provide supports that are sustainable and that are unique to that community. Too much top-down is not going to be of help. So bubbling up from the community with the circles, with people engaged, so they can learn what's going to help and happen in that community for the sustainment of it. But the communities have to have a plan, and I appreciate Bruce leading that with everybody out in the communities. You just don't throw money at something. You have to have a reason why.
How long will the fact-finding take, do you think, and when do you think that you might be able to move forward, or at least what's your next step?
Well, the next step is we've got the facilitators recruited in, and we're going to actually be training them the end of June. And then soon after the end of June, the study circles can begin. Ideally, they'll start sometime in July and August. Each session runs about 3 hours. We're going to have 4 sessions, and they're spaced about a month apart. And the reason being is because when you convene them together, they'll deliberate and talk about the information that we have currently right now. Ask questions, get answers, that sort of thing. Then, as they move to the end of the session, more information will start to bubble up. What is it that we need more information about? What's not known right now? And then it'll be our responsibility as the grant organizers to collect that information as much as possible. So if we would spend 2 to 3 weeks researching it, looking at the internet, looking at other states, looking at other data sources, other data points, to kind of provide the study circles with that information that they're requesting. Then they would come back together for a second round and then start to look at the information that they're provided with and start to dissect that again to see, well, okay, so now we've got some more answers. And so then that process is repeated until you get to the 4th study circle where you start to say, okay, what do we know now? What are some of the options that we can pursue? What is it that we as a community want to put our energy towards now that we know what we know?
The team of Our Town, Our Kids is comprised of Bruce and I, and we represent the Extension folks, but we also have colleagues in communication studies and then sociology. Those faculty also have some stellar students, but we also have colleagues at Fort Hays State University. They're with the Docking Institute, and they're the ones really helping us look at the data that was provided by the Department of Corrections, making sense of it because it's really in depth, and then making it in such a way palatable so local folks can really look at it and understand. So not only are we involving our faculty in the field of Extension, Bruce and I are kind of the stopgap between Extension and the faculty here at K-State, but we've got a lot of other folks working with us.
That's Kansas State University Associate Professor and Extension Specialist in the School of Family Studies and Human Services, Elaine Johannes. She and Wyandotte County Extension Agent and State Specialist for Community Vitality Programs, Bruce Chladny, are involved in the Our Town, Our Kids pilot project. For more information, visit ourtownourkids.org. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.